meeting to order. And we're going to start by adopting the agenda for the meeting.
I'll move the agenda.
Okay, thank you. And a second. That's Kathleen. Oh, you're muted, Kathleen. Okay.
I'll second. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Okay, Donna, I'm having a problem here with my screen.
Okay, no problem. We just everyone's
I'm just
fine
going
with-
to I'm just going to go I'm just going to stop the video and try and start it again. Can I just leave it to you to continue? I'll be right back.
Sure,
Okay.
no problem. Okay, all in favor? Any abstain or oppose? Great. Okay. Now we're going to go on to motion to adopt the minutes that were attached to the agenda. Any comment before we look for a mover? No changes, additions? Okay, great. Can we get a mover for that motion?
I can move that for you, Donna.
Thanks, Barb. And a seconder? Councillor Richardson, thank you. All in favor? Great. Abstain or oppose? Great. Carried. All right, we're gonna have to wait for Susan to come back. We'll see what happens here. I think procedurally, if Susan isn't able to get back into the meeting, it would move to Athol as vice chair to continue. We'll just give her another second or two. Yeah, we're fine. Okay. Athol, do you want to take over and sit as chair until Susan comes back? Or I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether you run as chair for the rest of the meeting. I don't. We would have to contact clerks probably for that procedural question. But
I think that Susan's flashed back on, but the next thing on the agenda is a declaration of pecuniary interest. Are there any declarations? There being none, I hand it back to you, Susan.
Thanks very much, Athol. Sorry about that, Donna. We've had problems here at the gallery all day.
no problem.
Okay. So where I apologize, everybody.
No problem. We adopted the minutes. Then Athol took over just to step in while the chair was having technical difficulties. He did the declarations of pecuniary interest, of which there were none,
Okay, so,
and then passed back to you.
yeah, thank you. So thanks, Donna, for that. So the adoption of the minutes from our previous meeting. If there's, if
Yeah.
everybody's okay with those minutes.
It's been done. Yeah, Trace or Barb moved it and Tracy seconded it.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Okay. Is there any new business there then, Donna?
Yeah, the new business is the interim report.
Okay, I've missed something here then, Donna. I apologize. Can I ask for your assistance to walk me through here? I've got a gap in my paperwork.
Okay, no problem. I just have to open up a different screen. It's no problem.
On my agenda, the next item would be the deputation.
So 6.1, the Cultural Center Feasibility Task Force, the Cultural Center Feasibility Task Force interim report. And that will be where we take over, or where Julie and Peter and the team take over. Do you need share screen, Julie? Let me make sure that you're able to. Okay, I think you are.
I think so. Just before, shall I, is that my signal to?
That's your
to go?
signal.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'll take it. So thank you, everyone. I think you know me. I'm Julie Whelan, and I'm the project manager for the feasibility study. And I'm joined today, as Donna mentioned, by Nordicity's senior partner, Peter Lyman, our research analyst, Angela Haynes, who, of course, from Nordicity, been with the project all the way, and you may have spoken with in December, and of course, Stephanie Ma from JIMO Architects. So thank you so much for having us. And now I will go to share my screen here. So I think this will work. So is that a nice full screen for you, or do you see all the surrounding stuff?
Surrounding
No.
stuff.
There you go.
Now it's full.
That's a bit better. Okay, that should do it. Okay, so and now agenda. So our assumption here is that you have all received and read through the interim report, which really provides the foundation for today's discussion. Rather than really tread through that report in its entirety, our focus today is to really narrow in on the emerging vision for the cultural center or centers, and gain clarity as we head forward into phase 3. So on deck today is starting briefly with our goal and a brief overview or project status update, review and discuss the emerging vision and the sort of prioritizations for the Moscow analysis. And that will set up our facilitated discussion, which is where we're going to spend the bulk of our time. And finally, we'll finish with sort of previewing phase 3's activities and next steps at the end of our session. We didn't want to take up the full 2 hours. We weren't sure if you had kind of some starter and ender material, but these are just kind of loose time guidelines depending on how we go too. Hopefully that looks good. So today's goal really to reflect on the research and consultation of phase 1 and 2 to sharpen our focus for the further analysis in phase 3 based on what we're calling the kind of priority functions of the cultural hub or the cultural centers, so that we can sort of advance and think about the operating model, locations, and other considerations in the feasibility and sustainability going forward. And we're really trying to, in phase 3 and in our ultimate recommendations in phase 4, come up with something that can be really desirable, but also, feasible and viable for the sector, for the community. We definitely find that the clearer and more concrete we are heading into phase 3, the stronger that assessment is. So that's why today's such a kind of pivotal moment, which you can see outlined in red in the status update here. So a very quick look back at our project overview. As you know, we did encounter some delays through the fall and of course with Omicron in January and that shut down. But we've worked to prep some of phase 3 in advance, and today, as I mentioned, marks our kind of pivotal bridge from phase 2 to phase 3, narrowing the focus for us to be able to move forward and crunch the numbers, look at governance approaches, consider what locations are truly feasible, what design choices might be made before ultimately making those recommendations in phase 4. Stephanie, I'll just let you talk briefly about some of your fantastic work over this period, and we'll do next steps at next steps, but you can talk a bit about what you've been up to, Stephanie.
Sure. I'll just add a bit of clarity into some of these in terms of, what review, planning, facility, mapping, all that means. So our scope in these early phases of phase 1 and 2 leading up to this point and what is in the interim report include a review of many different facilities. I think we had a list of over 60 facilities that we did a review of, background check. This review includes not just understanding the sites, but also looking through building condition assessments that were provided by the city, as well as floor plans of those, and going through those to get to a bit more of a short list, which is still quite long, but a shorter list than 60 different sites. And so that led to the site visit, which I don't know if Julie, if you're talking about that at another point, but the site visit that happened, I think it's mentioned in the report, on March 21st to a number of sites. And all of this information in terms of location and facilities is also feeding in from the comparable study, which was just looking at some inspiration early on. And that will then push into the next phase 3 and 4, which Julie will talk about soon.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie. And yeah, we can actually picture, I think, where Barb is sitting and where Susan is sitting, because we had our tours. So before we look at the vision and the sort of in-demand features that came through in our works to date, our work so far, we sort of wanted to hop in a time machine and take a brief peek back at the draft vision that was developed for the cultural centers or center some 5 years ago. And we were just reminded that at the time, that vision for there already to be sort of 2 components or multiple components, multiple sites, was already taking shape and was already part of the kind of origin of this concept. And the first site was envisioned as a kind of centrally located center or hub that would attract and invite all citizens to participate in the arts, support the culture sector with exhibition, performance, and event space, and more. A second separate collections facility would provide suitable, needed space for collections management, but would still be highly accessible. All the material would be highly accessible when needed for research and display purposes. So, 5 years later, the vision that's coming through in our work is relatively compatible with this starting point. Perhaps more emphasis on that, the kind of language or the focus of that arts, culture, and heritage center versus the broader community center, and maybe thinking a little more long term. We're thinking a lot about that feasibility kind of language. I'll just forward. But this slide shows a bit, a snapshot of that emerging vision. It was provided in more detail in the interim report. We spread it out over a number of slides with guiding principles and all sorts. We talked about the success factors, audience and user base, but just briefly here, it reads that the Kawartha Lakes Cultural Centers will be a facility or facilities that respond to the space needs reported by the city and the cultural sector. It or they will aim to leverage available building stock and set in place a viable operating model that invites Kawartha Lakes' cultural organizations and artists to share facilities, space, and programming assets. The results should be a transformational community asset that would develop greater cohesiveness or cohesion, I guess that could be, and provide a model for institutional development and sustainability for generations to come. So getting that kind of long lens of growth in kind of planted in there. And just some of the themes that came through in the survey, in the public facing survey and in our consultations, they're just like highlighted in briefly here in this visual, but we see growth, exhibitions, showcase, welcoming, educational, inclusive, affordable. And if not clear from Stephanie's description, at this point, multiple solutions site-wise and location-wise are still in play. And we'll all kind of be, after this session, that's what we'll move towards in phase 3. Now, I can pause here for any kind of reactions, or we can kind of keep going into the zoom into the further detail of today's vision, which gets into those requirements in the Moscow analysis. But now I can't see everyone to see what the interest might be. Maybe I'll plow forward because we've got
plow forward.
Plow forward. Thank you, Peter. Okay. Where are we here? Oh yeah, okay, so the following slides present, again, building on that emerging vision, kind of zooming in here on what we heard in our consultations and through our other research, the assessment of the priority features. And just to briefly set up this whole Moscow analysis framework in case it was new to you, must have, we think of those core elements or features of a facility that, if not pursued, these would really jeopardize the success of the whole endeavor. Like this is, without these, we're in a really, we're not probably in a viable position. Should have would be the important or value added components. Could have, or those features which would be very nice to include if you had the resources, but aren't strictly necessary for success. And typically when we would have done this in the past, and when we do this, we think of the line between should have and could have as quite thin. It's funny, in this case, in this project, it's more like the line between must have and should have is pretty fluid and porous. So will be really interesting to get your feedback there. Certainly our assessment of what was must have features were kind of rooted in the consultations, but also kind of in the scope presented in the RFP, where that shared collections and management functionality was kind of at the heart of the envisioned facility, and then the features that kind of seem to logically complement that. Maybe that's where we were sort of that kind of felt in the must have for us. But we'd love to think through these features with you and think about or ask, in your view, is success dependent on any of these elements or on a specific given element? What would it mean for the facility not to follow through with a given feature? Are there any that you would promote or demote, particularly in the context of what you read in the interim report and in that analysis? Sorry, this is a long thing for me, but just to say, one of our concerns as consultants is always that we really want to focus on a facility that is sustainable and accessible and affordable, guiding principles that really came through, from the public in the survey and from the culture, arts, and heritage interviews that sector interviews in the roundtable, those priorities. So to be accessible and affordable and inclusive and sustainable, one thing that can kind of work against that is elevating everything into must-have, as tempting as it is. That can really drive up costs. That can cut locations from contention, just because we're growing into a much larger entity. and so can kind of work against our drive at something sustainable and feasible. That being said, we're also in a unique context here because we know, as we, from 2017 until today, that we can sort of configure the solution in a number of different ways. We can look at 2 sites. We can look at a few different ways of kind of making this facility work. So I'm not trying to have all my, not trying to have the cake and eat it too, but I appreciate it's a complex kind of undertaking that we're going through, but we'd love to kind of go through and walk through with you our assessment so far, and that you'd have seen in the interim report. Now, some things we just, for simplicity, and this was great feedback from Donna, but maybe I didn't take it far enough, was just to simplify a little bit some of our notes here. You'll have seen in the report, things that especially Stephanie would describe as kind of, how would you describe it, Stephanie? Things like security systems or, accessible,
Building
AOT
standards.
Building standards, thank you. So we tried not to include those, but I think I still included some things that are kind of a little duplicative when you think of, so for example, lighting and climate control for state-of-the-art archive needs. Well, that would follow naturally from the facilities themselves as for current and future acquisitions. So,
And to clarify, they're just not included in here because they're assumed that they would be in general, not because we don't respect standards.
That's right. Yeah, we absolutely respect standards and would include throughout, but just didn't want to kind of clog up the space with those bullets around some of those pieces. But so our thought was to kind of walk through this, or I can do it lightly at first to go through, and then we can kind of dive in and get your feedback, get some of your reactions, any questions or anything that felt unclear. But certainly the must-have, at this moment, looks like that archive, storage, and preservation facilities for to accommodate current needs that are already overflowing in a sense, and future growth, and all the necessary technical supports around that. Shared exhibition space and display, which came through both from organizations but also from members of the public as being a kind of in demand. A permanent and fitting home for the Kawartha Lakes Art Gallery. A space for public access to really follow through with that accessible principle, whether for researchers or for the public. We saw that members of the public have a deep interest in Kawartha Lakes history and stories, so that we know that this is kind of a unique element of your community or desire. Education spaces for workshops and special presentations came through as a need as well. Perhaps a little vague. We're gonna follow through as well to get a little more specificity here, but related, the related office and administrative space for to support these functions, and ventilation. Now, ventilation might seem like a building standard element here. We just raise it because we did have a good meeting with Curve Lake representatives, and they talked about how for them to be able to feel invited and invited in the space and welcome in the space, one accommodation would be to have ventilation that could support, say, for example, smudging or other ceremonial activities, and that thinking about that in the design would make it even that more likely that they could be another sort of user of the space in the future. Okay, so that's our kind of first nugget. Then we move to the should haves. Here we're getting into more the rehearsal space for live performance. Again, thinking flexibility, which was a principle that came through quite loud and clear. A black box space, sort of music studio, music rehearsal, a place where we could incubate new ideas and new performance works without necessarily being on your performance stage or venue. Studio spaces to create and design art of all types. A flexible event space to host large and small gatherings, including community festivals, which were very popular. I will say a couple of long answers talked specifically about kind of a need for that, 0 to 50 capacity. And not sure if that resonates with yourselves of kind of a small to, on the smaller end in some ways of a flexible space. Projection capacity for screenings, incorporation of Indigenous languages into signage, and natural elements to bring the outside in. So here's our must-have and should-haves. And I can't see everyone, so I'm so sorry if I'm missing any questions or cues. We'll just keep going. The would-have and nice-to-haves. So, oh gosh, sorry. So on the could-have, so again, these are features which would be nice to include if you had the resources, but aren't strictly, we're not relying on these necessarily for success. Now, you may have a different reaction, but this would have been our assessment. Building on the studio spaces in the previous, there was in the survey some demand about kind of a lack of support for the textile creators, I guess, or makers. So looking for specialized maker or creator spaces that could support working through textiles, whether it be spinning wheels and dyeing capacities, whether that's kind of all the like sinks and laundry and all that kind of stuff that might be required as well. A cafe is always an interesting element of one of these facilities. Flexible space to accommodate multiple community uses. So thinking about, again, those kind of kitchen facilities, something that could potentially accommodate a daycare. Again, these are a little bit vaguer, a little softer signals that we got, but certainly did arise in our consultation. Or in at least an interview, and then additional community stakeholder offices, spaces for whether it be other like-minded not-for-profits or others in the cultural sector who may have needs around office space and head office, maybe So it's a bit of a shorter list, a little broader, maybe getting more into that community center zone. In terms of the will not have, now we haven't eliminated much. So we just thought we'd put here, as in a sense, more kind of in the spirit of will not have, that we heard loud and clear that this space should not displace other organizations or displace other activities. We're not trying to kind of, it should be supporting a need, not displacing other organizations. And we know, while it could be multi-sited, obviously not every community will, receive a building or, a building type investment. So that was just to kind of round that out. But I think what we see here is we haven't eliminated a lot, and it may just be that the vision set out from the beginning was so clear. It wasn't that there was a lot of extraneous stuff coming to the fore, but it is sort of interesting to pause there. So I'm thinking that I'll stop sharing, but I can go back to sharing if it's simpler. But maybe I'll stop sharing, and you might work with your interim report if you have it printed out, or I can go back easily to the slides if simpler. But or I can kind of keep going actually to the discussion prompts, but any reactions. Sorry, we have a facilitated discussion set up as well, but just any initial reactions on the must have. Or Peter, do you think I should keep going?
No, I think time to stop now. We can pick it up further.
Julie, I might like to say, I thought it was very thorough and inclusive, which has always been I feel has been a priority behind the initiative, that it is inclusive and creates opportunities for future growth. So I don't have any insights of anything I can perceive as a shortcoming with what's been outlined. So thank you, Norda City. Anybody else? Any feedback at this point?
I guess I just have one question, if I might, in the must-have section, it says related office and admin space for city staff and curatorial office. So are we looking at a completely city-run facility run by their own staffing? Is that kind of the governance model that you're leaning towards if they're going to have city staffers on site, I guess?
So that's a great question. And we'd love, one of our discussion prompts is around governance models and considerations. And so there's like multiple models we would look at, and how can we sort of come up with one that best fits the spirit of this facility, while also recognizing that there is a kind of a municipality connection there potentially with staff on site. So how to find that balance. And we think there are kind of hybrid models or blended, I guess, models, but on a spectrum of, as you say, like municipally operated and run to something more of like an independent not-for-profit, but that maybe has an agreement or something with the city in place. So phase 3, but would love to talk more about it and actually have it as a direct prompt. So we can park it, but we'd love to talk more about your thoughts too.
Okay.
Tracy.
Thank you. Yeah, that's one of the questions I was going at, and I noticed, like, moving into phase 3, I think we're going to have some stronger recommendations come out of all this analysis regarding, what elements are, targeting and whatnot. And I think that's going to be the critical next step, is figuring out what we need, what's the square footage, how do we, perform this collaboration, inclusion, sustainability, whatnot. So I totally appreciate all the work that's going into this, and I'm looking forward to phase 3, just starting to pull it together and have some suggestions.
Council?
I know that on behalf of the groups that I represent, there was a request or a felt need for the 3 components to be of assistance to the existing organizations, and not to take over from the existing organizations, but to be available to assist them. And the 3 things that were brought up continuously in our meetings were the archivist, the curator, and the conservator. So that if, say, Maryborough needed an item conserved, that there would be someone available to assist with that kind of function, or at least advise on that kind of function, if not performing it. So I guess my question is, I haven't seen a conservator or anything in this list anywhere, so I'm just wondering what kind of happened to that sort of need.
Right. Now, I think I think that is still part of the vision, this idea that there's like expertise housed at that facility that the broader network can draw on. And even Donna, you can weigh in at any point, but that there's even a step towards that with Laura's hire. Is that right?
Yeah, so in the cultural master plan, the identification of an archivist, and that was filled in January 2020. Angela is on the line, actually, if you have any questions or want to discuss that extension out into the community and with other facilities. Laura Love was onboarded January 2022. Yeah, and that also was from the cultural master plan, and also council direction from last March to actually accelerate that, so that it did sort of fall in line with this study, and then also requests from the community for additional help when it came to curatorial services. And so I do think that also is a little bit of the impetus around having identified like city staff on site. Because if it's shared space, and if it's for conservatorship and for collections and management and things, it would it would be great if city staff were on site. So therefore, whether it's sharing exhibits, whether it's sharing collections to do traveling, like all of that wonderful stuff that happens when there's collaboration involved. And then for it to be on site, I think that was one of the reasons why it was identified there. But as you said, we're going to get into that later. So yeah, 2 of those 3. Now the conservator, I think actually is the hybrid between those 2 positions. A conservator wasn't identified individually. But Laura and Angela certainly can talk to their own skill set and how that fits sort of within their envelope.
I think we can talk about the fact that our model might be a hybrid where there is some participation in governance from those positions and from the community and organizations at large in governing this facility.
The facility or the positions?
Pardon me?
Sorry, the facility or the positions that we've just been talking about?
Well, the facility. If they're going to be on site, Peter, if their offices are going to be on site, I believe there should be some participation in perhaps the governance model as well.
I think Julie has mentioned that we do want to talk about governance model, and maybe we can talk about it now or whatever, but yes, what Donna was talking about was perhaps the assumption as to certainly what the maybe primary, I don't know, alternative is a governance model in which these 2 employees remain as employees of the city. Now, how the governance structure works within that context, I think is phase 3 is what we're going to get more specific on.
Pat? Pat?
Yes.
I just wondered if you had some thoughts.
Well, I'm trying to digest the information. I did not have the opportunity to look at a printed copy of the interim report ahead of time. I don't know if it's in my spam or junk mail, but I don't believe I received anything. So I'm digesting it for the first time here. I don't know who is responsible for sending out those communications, but I'll go back and check through, but I've really received very little since this whole process started. So I'm playing catch up, I guess. I did have to miss a few meetings for family situations, but I'm going to reserve my comments at the moment until I've had some time to digest it.
Okay, I think why I put you on the spot like that, Pat, was to specifically to governance as we've moved into a conversation now about governance, and we had shared we had some discussion previously, and so not to put you on the spot, and I respect if you just want to hold off, but I did wonder if you had anything to add about the conversation currently around the table about governance.
Well, what I'm reading between the lines and hearing is the direction is that this would be a municipal-owned, municipally operated facility, and the major players would not necessarily be involved in the governance. I may be wrong, but that's kind of what I'm hearing so far. Is that correct or not correct, or no?
I don't think it's so much a matter of what's correct and what isn't correct. I think it's discussion about what possibly could be. So I really think it's more about what could possibly be.
Yeah, as we said, this is something we have preliminary, thought about it, and there's other models, different models, but we bear down on that in phase 3. So this is trying to figure out what it is going to be subject to governance, not specifically, but the what rather than the how it's going to work. And so the how it's going to work obviously gets into the who's going to pay the bills, is there revenue, how it's going to be financed, and all that kind of thing, which puts a bit of a governor or restraint on how big it is and how many features it has and that kind of thing. But governance is very much part of that discussion. So we certainly, if you've got any, the crisper ideas we can start off with, the better. So I think we're open to that. Hey, Julie and Donna.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Peter. And I know myself personally, I need to take a thought and go away and research and kind of wade my way through it. And how is the best way for, as the individuals around the table start to come up with some thoughts, how is the best way to share those thoughts?
Well, sorry, Julie, but I think that's sort of the visioning process that we're going to be getting into. It's high level, of course, for now, but it will help shape phase 3. And of course, then with phase 3, there'll be additional opportunity to provide comment at the next task force, and of course through email and such.
Okay.
If I can just circle back with Pat. So for the to be able to access the report and the agenda, the link that was sent went to the calendar on the city website. And if you open that up, you actually see it looks like a little paperclip on the agenda. That's the link. So I apologize if that wasn't clear when you open up the document, like if it didn't change out or do a different color for you. You just have to click on that paperclip, and then that will give you the report. So I just wanted to circle back before I got distracted with the next phase.
Thank you. I'll look forward to the rest of the report today and reserve my comments until I've heard the rest of it. Thank you.
All right. Maybe we'll go back to the kind of facilitated discussion, because you think you're getting off the hook, but we're not. We're going to dive just deeper in right now. And I'll just go back. So let me just make sure I've got the right one here. Okay, so I'm going to do my same thing. Okay, so this is a pretty generic, and we'll see how lively we get today. But just with the time we have, and I think we have a good chunk of time. And again, I can flip back to the Moscow at any point if it, especially if you're looking at it kind of for the first couple of times. But yeah, we'll just listen to one another. We may have to park a few things, but we are keen to dip our toe into phase 3 and already kind of have been prepping that way. So we'll just focus on who we have in the room or who you're representing, share space with one another and listen to one another and be respectful, because all contributions are valid for sure. So, we could really go back slowly through and just see if there are any. I know we've got Susan on side, so that's fantastic, but is there anything you would promote or demote, or you were surprised to see where it landed in the framework, especially hearing a bit more about each of the kind of categories? If not, or even if so, are there any specific kind of ranges that you would think of capacity wise? I'm thinking, not that you're going to have a square footage assessment rolling, off at the tip of your fingers or anything like that, but anything you would see as wanting to weigh in on. For sure, we've been trying to think about the needs of the space, but or what Peter described as kind of like the what. But as we move to how, we have to kind of really get into some of these narrower focus specifics. Even in backing up, in what ways does that 2022 vision resonate with you? Either the slide we showed or the more fulsome description in the interim report. What could work well within that vision? What doesn't work that well for you? How do you react to any of the comparable facilities presented in the report, or there was a smaller set presented last month in the roundtable? That's sometimes a useful, as Stephanie said, kind of inspiration point. We're not trying to kind of open back up. We're not going back to a kind of a blue sky here, but are there any kind of features or elements that really fit your vision and might help you kind of articulate why something could be promoted, for example? And then where we already have gone to as a group, and we're happy to spend some time here, more time here. Can you share your thoughts on preconditions for feasibility that we could, that we could carry forward into the next phase? So specifically kind of the business model, thinking about revenue and expenditures. Obviously, we're looking at capital costs, but we want to think about the operating model as well. Some of that will flow, of course, from governance considerations. And I'm reminded that we got some good feedback through the consultations around some of our considerations of, listen, if this is a shared facility, how can there be, the right shared services agreement so that all the users feel, really confident in their ability to access the materials they need in a time frame that's reasonable for both, whoever's managing it, but also on their side, all those things that we want to kind of think through. We might not get into that level of detail in the report, but we want to at least acknowledge the necessity of an appropriate shared services agreement, for example. So I'm not sure if these prompts are helpful, or I can go back to any part of the must-have and the should-have. We could spend some time there. Anything you would strike from the list altogether?
Julie, would it help to pull the must-have,
Pull it.
should-have, and just as long as people remember promote and demote, we can.
Okay, Julie, I'm gonna dive in here. I think in looking at and speaking on behalf of the gallery and the Arts Council, a priority for us has always been space, enough space to be able to develop partnerships, to provide events, to provide programming. I know we've talked in the past, and much of what I said you've already heard. So at the just repeating myself, in looking at funding to support a center, I think it's I've always felt it's really important that the sector, the cultural sector, be able to prove its value so that people want to invest to support the development of a center. And the one way that that can happen is with programming, having space for programming that provides supports for the community, space that creates opportunities for renovate money generation. It must be the time of day. I really, and in building the partnerships, I think a really important partnership is the partnership with our municipality. We're in a position to really create a support system for the cultural organizations of our municipality that would hopefully create increased an eligibility for the various cultural organizations to be eligible for more funding opportunities, and to be able to even look at a potential funding model through the master cultural plan to cover levels of operating expenses. So I really, in looking at what potentially governance models, I find it hard to be able to write today, to be able to, it is something that I've been looking at because there are other models there, but it's hard for myself to provide much feedback on that today. I see any future space being, the success of it being dependent on the partnerships and the networking that can be built, that can be built out of the facility, that can be generated out of the facility, to keep it sustainable and to keep it current, to meeting the needs of not just the cultural organizations, but our community. And I think there's a lot of levels what we could be providing for our community in the way of services.
I would agree with Susan that we've spent a lot of time over the years talking about this exact thing. At one time, early on in the process, when we came up with the cultural center concept, we actually were talking in terms of calling it a cultural activity center, feeling that the necessity for more and ongoing foot traffic in and out of a facility and a regular programming that was also able to be a revenue generator, that I don't see having although I think these core elements are terrific, having a facility that is only archival and storage does not generate any revenue. Exhibition space would be very low revenue generating, and education, again, low revenue generating. The sustainability from a business model will require activity in the process.
Right, and that, for example, like sometimes the, well, I won't maybe go into it, but just that's where the kind of the cafe or something like that can be a bit more of an efficient way to, or F&B, food and bev, as our colleague Greg calls it, but can be kind of it's a tangible revenue generator usually. For the most part, but no, I think you're right, had to help us think about, this must have, should have, where are our sources of, incoming revenue, and is it balanced? Susan, I wondered, I don't know if you're prepared to talk about it in this forum or on this call, but we'd love to think a bit about, your needs and whether how much of it can be sort of shared or flexible. It was great to come and see the space in real life, but thinking of ways that Stephanie might estimate the needs of the gallery in a new space, and how we could look at would you want 365 days a year of an exhibition, or would you even be, would you at times have, cede the space, an exhibition space, to another organization, or should we think of your exhibition space and others with, as people talked about, these movable plinths and shared, anyway, that we can get into that maybe in another forum, but just getting more into some of those specifics, I suppose. Stephanie, I'm kind of mangling that.
Could I, I was gonna say, could I add to that? But that's helpful to focus on Susan, your comment on enough space. I think that's a really important comment. And it's one that we want to be able to define in the next phase, because obviously if we put forward a final report to you that just says enough space, that's not useful to you for figuring out, what is that? What size is that? Where is that? So I thought it might be helpful to just explain our next steps in phase 3. So that you understand also where some of these questions are coming from. Essentially, in the next phase, we will take this must have, should have, could have, won't have list and try and itemize it into spaces, and then add a square footage to each of those types of spaces to figure out how much size is needed for this. And then that would calculate, essentially, I'm oversimplifying it here, but calculate a total square footage for what is the must have. And then once we have that total square footage, we look at, where could this fit? Is it one center? We've obviously been talking about this hub and spoke model. So there's many different options in how it can be oriented. It might be some of the square footage is concentrated in the center, but others are spread out throughout the spokes. So we'll get into those details, but we do need to calculate a square footage range. And so when we're looking at things like exhibition space or a gallery space, trying to get into that is very helpful. We try and do a minimum maximum. The minimum, of course, just using the gallery space is an easy example. We wouldn't propose any minimum smaller than what is currently there. And also we would address the other minimum needs of, a ground level frontage and things like that. But, the maximum question of how much space could a gallery, could an education, could a programming space be, an activity center, that can be double the size, triple, quadruple. So that's where we're getting into in the next phase. And all the feedback in this discussion will really help with that. And then that also ties into that question of operations. But hopefully that helps clarify where these questions are coming from.
The one thing I would like to say to the question about exhibit space is that yes, the gallery needs a new home. That's our reality. The library needs to grow. They need this space. We need to get out of here. But in going into a new facility, the idea has always been that it be inclusive exhibit space that can be used for the gallery, but also space that could exhibit artifacts from the various heritage organizations that could share information, that those exhibits in a central location that could that would drive interest for visitors to visit those outlying cultural organizations. So I just ask, thank you for thinking of the gallery and our needs, but it's something that I believe this is an opportunity to do things differently than we've done in the past. And in creating exhibit space, the most important thing to do in an exhibit space is be able to engage people. You engage people, you catch their interest. You catch their interest, they want to know more. And if they want to know more, then they'll travel and they'll go and they'll check out the wealth of heritage organizations that we have in our municipality. So yes, we need new space, but we also need to do things differently. And to offer an exhibit opportunity that is inclusive and just not specific to the gallery, I see as a real need.
Is that the difference, what you're saying, Susan, particularly that there is a kind of a revolving door of other exhibits that are not owned by the gallery or being kept up by the gallery itself? Is that the difference you're talking about? You say doing things differently?
I think so. I think there's an opportunity in when you look at the wealth of collections that they recognize 12 cultural organizations within the city of Kawartha Lakes. Many of them have collections, and the collections are dormant much of the time. We can put up exhibits. It's hard to generate people to come through to see them. Many of the collections tell a story, be it artwork or actual pieces. They tell a story, and a lot of times those stories connect. They dovetail together to tell the story of our community. And I think there's a real opportunity in working together out of a shared exhibit space, that we start doing things more collectively than individually. I think we'll tell a better story. And I see when you're trying to host an exhibit, as I said before, you're trying to engage people. We've got to be able to offer them more.
Ethel.
Hi. I just want to emphasize here that I agree with the portion that Susan is bringing forward, that I believe the success of this place will be from the networking that the stakeholders can perform with each other, so that the space becomes a shared use and becomes an exciting place that changes continuously, so that not only are there artworks exhibited, but there are perhaps 1 month a collection exhibit from Kirkfield, another month from Maryborough Lodge, another month from the Boyd, just so that people are getting an idea of what's out there and then being encouraged to go on their journey exploring this whole beautiful city of ours. And that each component needs to formulate a better networking relationship with each other, so that this center becomes a center of our cultural activities, our heritage activities, and our art activities. And so from my point of view, and from that of the people in our group, it's that sharing that causes people to go out and explore, not come in there and stop, but that sends them out to explore all the potential of all the places in Kawartha Lakes.
I think Barbara, you had your hand up.
Thanks so much. Sorry, my phone's just ringing here. I'm going to have to ignore it for a second. So I actually really appreciate the comments of those before me about trying to increase visitor traffic, increasing engagement. We all want to see that throughout the city at all the heritage sites. But I think we have to be really, really kind of nuts and bolts about this too. I think it's fantastic work that's been done so far, because it really drilled down to what we'd like to see happen. But reality is, it's going to depend on whether it's a brand new build, where it's built to suit what may come, or whether it's going to be a retrofit of a current building that the city already owns, or if it's going to be chopped up into multiple spaces. So it's very much about trying to decide the framework of what that is before you can figure out exactly what you're going to put in it. In some regards, creating larger spaces that may be used for revenue generation are that's a lot of square footage to potentially leave dormant at times, or to have to manage for renting out if we're looking at creator spaces or whatnot. It's just that would be more suited to a build to suit kind of option. Food and beverage absolutely is fantastic. That is always a great way to keep people on site, maybe even like improve gift shop sales and whatnot. Makes it more of a destination outing to be able to go have lunch or a snack or coffee and see some fantastic art and maybe see a program or something. I think that there has to be some serious, reality check about the cost that is involved in museum exhibit generation, gallery exhibit generation, in return with revenue. Because it is very expensive to create new exhibits, and our door revenues don't cover that. So if we're looking at building new exhibits all the time, shifting them around, and transportation is expensive, can be, we have to look at is there going to be funds available to the other organizations to support that kind of work. And in regards to programming in addition is also very expensive to put on. And if it is a municipally run building, there will be expectations by the community that it would be either free or low cost. Creating engaging programming as a means to elicit donations or future contributions to an organization, that's something we also have to look at, because again, if it's deemed to be a city building, city-run organization, that's not necessarily where people are going to look to put their donation dollars. They would look more to put them towards the individual nonprofits. So that's, you know, I think you have to look at the reasoning behind, like if you're looking at doing programming for programming's sake, which is wonderful and necessary, that is good. But if you're looking at it for future revenue generation, there's no balance there in the scale. You know, as Susan said, we want to see people coming in, we want them engaged, we want them coming back again and again. And programming is really important for that. We see it here in the museum as well, but through all the different heritage sites, we all do something so unique and different that it encourages people to come back to our sites again and to see each other. You know, Settlers Village does things much different than Boyd, than the Maryborough Larch, than we do here at the Kawartha Lakes Museum and Archives. And we are looking at how to support whatever comes from this study. And I just think it's just really a spot to be realistic right now about the physicality of whatever is built compared to revenue generation potential. I guess if you're like expecting to create something hoping it'll pay for itself, I think you need to be really realistic that with museum, exhibition space, gallery space, it's more investing in the sector, because money invested in heritage and culture provides incredible financial returns for the businesses around us, not necessarily the businesses of like our own spaces. So it helps the community in so many ways, but it kind of can be a black hole for funding. And I think we just need to really recognize that. One thing I really just wanted to check on, if you don't mind, I noticed that with the facility assessments that you went through all the different spaces and kind of noted which ones may be just a spoke or maybe potentially a hub. But also it was noted that places that are already in existence wouldn't be displaced. So the armories was listed as a potential, the Old Jail Museum, Kawartha Lakes Museum and Archives was listed as a potential hub. I'm not sure how that works in, but also the Omimi, so the Ops Rec Center, which has been slated for demolition. So has there been other empty buildings or other emptied land that's been identified for potential use at this point, or is that a future quest?
Shall I go ahead and answer that? Okay. Yeah, so we started with a full list of available buildings that we had easier access to. Just from a feasibility study perspective, we tend to do that by looking at municipal buildings available because existing buildings leverage, you know, heritage, community, and building on what's already there and also understanding what's there. And then in terms of looking at the sites that we did look at, it's kind of a twofold analysis. So on one hand, you want to look at buildings where people are already attracted to going to, gathering, that answers that centrally located desire. So that's what leads to things like the armory, like the old jail, being on that list and understanding how those operate. But also, as you point out, we don't want to displace current programming and activity. So that's certainly something when we're visiting, we're understanding how are these spaces being used. Is there any vacant space? That's part of the site visit analysis, either internally or externally, like outside the building. As you pointed out earlier, there's options for retrofits, renovations, but also new construction. And in between that is new construction additions to existing buildings. So all of those are on the table and all of those are being considered. In terms of things like the ops site, as you pointed out, that is one that has been developing since we started this project. The news about it being planned for demolition came out recently-ish, but it's still a site that we're looking at because there's no, as far as we're aware, no future plans for it. So even if the building itself is being demolished, it is a vacant land, as you've asked about if there's any vacant land. So all of those things are being considered. We have tried to look out for buildings that are like abandoned and vacant because those are ideal places for revitalization. it has not come up on our radar on any abandoned vacant buildings that match the location analysis. So that's not to say that that might not be a recommendation in phase 3, that, you know, we should do further investigation into any of those, but none are on our radar currently.
Stephanie, may I just ask if you've also considered buildings that are owned by the school boards as well as by the city?
We have requested information from the school board just recently, and my understanding is that there isn't any available stock. I don't know if Julie or Donna, if you have any further updates on that.
Yeah, I can answer that because I've been talking to the superintendent of buildings from the Trillium Lakelands District School Board. They are have requested from the ministry to be able to do, and I just want to make sure, because I just want to make sure I have the right term, an accommodation review. At this moment, at this point in time, there's a moratorium that's been put on by the ministry. And so school boards aren't doing them at the moment, but so they have requested. They do know that the changing demographics of the municipality, that there's a need to do this accommodation review. But at the present moment, there are no buildings eligible. And but that doesn't mean that long-range planning, of course, wouldn't come into consideration. And the school board works and has great communication directly with the CAO and council. And right in the regulations, municipalities have first right of refusal for buildings that are in their catchment area. And so there's definitely synergies, and there's already a really good working relationship already. But at the present moment, there are no buildings available.
We did also, I'll add, because it was very desirable for us to be able to find if there are any vacant available buildings. I believe that was a question in the survey of sorts of like, are there any sites available that you think of that could be considered for this? So that was also another way that we gathered that information. So we've been gathering that information throughout phase 1 and 2 as much as possible. And then phase 3, that's not to say that, you know, all locations that what was in the site visit are the only ones that will be considered for phase 3, but it is sort of trying to narrow down things. So that's where we're going to get into significantly more detail in the phase 3.
Thank you for your answer, Donna and Stephanie.
Stephen.
Hello, everyone. I'm not sure if I've met all of you, so I'm Stephen Boone. I am here for Adam Found. He is the manager of corporate assets, and I am the asset management analyst. So nice to meet you all. One topic per se is under the could have list. Some of these more specialized cases, and say a cafe, a kitchen, daycare, it brings up the question of water wastewater capacity. Because as I think you're all aware, we are a very rural municipality. So we have water wastewater systems in the more urban areas, but not all of the locations on these lists necessarily are on systems. So if we're looking at, say, having a cafe and a kitchen and a daycare, it would be a serious concern of, is there even enough land for a proper septic system to handle that capacity? So I'm sure that the architects and Nordic City and everyone is going to consider this. However, from just the asset management side, depending on how specialized we may go, may preclude whether it might have to be on a municipal system versus not. And I see here, for example, dying capacity. If that is a consideration that we really want to look into, we will definitely need to consult water wastewater to determine if that would have any impact on our system of dyes going down the drain through the pipes into our treatment plants. So this might be getting too into the weeds. This might be more of a next phase, but while I'm here, I just want to make the point that I agree that having potential revenue sources and more specialized facilities would be amazing. We just need to make sure that for a rural municipality like ourselves, we don't sort of pick a location and potentially consider expansion of either size or services, and then find out, oh no, the septic cannot handle it, or the water well does not have enough supply. So that's my sort of asset management piece from the city. This may have already been brought up, but I'm relatively new to this group, so that's sort of just my contribution. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Stephen. That was really an interesting insight that myself personally, I wasn't aware of. So thank you for that. I want to thank everybody to date for all their comments. This is great. And Athol, I see that you had your hand up, but Pat Murphy had his hand up earlier, and I just wondered if he still wished to speak. Pat, are you there?
Yes, going back a few steps when we had the must-haves and should-haves, I was thinking that you could pretty much interchange the shared exhibition space and flexible event space when we were discussing having more of a rotating activity in those spaces that could be a shared space. You know, it is indicating here that it is a permanent home for Kawartha Lakes Arts Gallery, but the main activity of the center does not necessarily have to be the art gallery. That it's just one component of it, but I think that having the flexibility to accommodate as many different types of exhibition as possible is key.
Yeah, no, I agree, Pat. Athol?
I was looking for an image that I had that I could share screen with, but I don't know if you can see this, all of you, but this is a adaptive reuse of a heritage building that is currently underway, and it's going to be the Wellness Center in Kobukong. And it's centered around the old railway station, and the new build is adjacent and behind it. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about hybrid use of spaces, that just because a building that's on your survey here, Stephanie, it seems small, it doesn't mean that it can't grow. And so this is an example of a current adaptive reuse that's before the Heritage Committee at the moment.
Yeah,
you,
and that's
Athol.
a great example also of that question of when we're looking at existing buildings, if they already have programming in it, are there opportunities to latch on to an addition that you know, leverages that there's programming and people and activity already there with an addition, just as one option that we're considering.
That building that's being adapted was abandoned, so
It came up on our radar when we were looking for abandoned buildings.
so I'm afraid it's taken. Thank you. Just wanted to share what I look at as from the Municipal Heritage Committee, adaptive reuse.
Julie, were there on the discussion prompts, what were the bottom two, the last two? I'm trying to remember. Do you want to pull them up?
Does Stephen have a question, or is that from your previous question?
No, I just forgot to take it down. Sorry. Thank you.
So that brings us back. Oh yeah, we had also any of the comparable facilities, if there was anything there that kind of resonated. Again, that requires kind of having the interim report in your hand. But I think we've almost, you know, the vision has kind of gotten us where we need to go in a sense through this discussion, which is great. Any other preconditions to feasibility? Barb talked on the business model around, you know, some of the realities around, you know, space, programming, revenues, expenses, investment, and the whole idea of investing in the sector, and maybe some of the halo of benefits that come from investing in the sector. So you can kind of reframing it a little bit that way, rather than just a pure sort of expense form. And then the governance considerations, just to bring it full circle, we started there, and certainly more to explore, but in phase 3, but happy to spend a bit more time there. We just need about 5 minutes at the end to go through some of our next steps. We should let you know phase 3 is really April, so it's here, and it's fast paced, but we're focused on the momentum created really over the past kind of week or so, and especially with the site visits as well in today's chat. But yeah, any other thoughts still while we have the prompts back up? Counselor?
In terms of governance, it would be nice, no matter kind of what the model is, if there is an overarching governance structure to it. It would be nice to have, you know, perhaps a representative of each of the heritage organizations or the gallery, you know, around to sit on that either board or committee, kind of as a representative of the users that would be sharing that space or sharing those opportunities, I guess, in addition to whatever city staff or city committee members that would sit on it.
You mean once it's operating, or
or even in kind of when they start getting to the build phase or whatever, once it's been agreed to, I guess, whatever the city decides to, or whatever council decides to approve and or give budget to, if it's going to be a shared model, if that's truly the concept of it, it would be nice if one person from all of the sharers, I guess, would sit and have a say in how the model goes forward, or how it comes together, and the types of programming and events and things that may, and that also too works both ways, because then they can bring the information back to their organizations. It has to be like, if we're talking about a truly collaborative effort, that's what I would see as being very collaborative, of everybody having kind of that seat at the table and being able to share both ways.
Counselor, thanks so much.
I mean, the last 20 minutes of this conversation, we've learned so much, and it's so good to hear everybody engaging. You know, like you said, it's an emerging vision. One of the big hurdles is that business plan. How do we make it work? I agree with Barb's comment. There, you know, it should be a committee of council, so you have those engaging bodies around the table, and you know what's happening in the environment, and you know, we have to rely on you to help us make the right decisions. So for governance, I definitely would support that. It's incredible when you start, and one of the reasons why I joined and want to be part of this is that we are very uniquely rural geographically. We have existing strong organizations, but we have room to grow, and we have room to grow together with collaboration. And, you know, just like I said, the last 20 minutes, we can see all that coming up on the table, and we've got more work in front of us, but I think today's really, I'm sure, has helped your team see a little bit more about the direction. And it is about collaboration. It is about the business plan. It's about good governance. It's about, you know, relying on those relationships that are existing in our communities and making us stronger. So thanks so far. Like I said, I'm really looking forward to phase 3.
That's a good summing line, Julie. I think that you can take your last 5 minutes away here.
Yeah. I think I saw Patrick's hand pop up, but any last words, Patrick, and then we'll go towards the next steps.
Just in business model, I guess I'm looking at history in this community. The only real venture that comes to my mind was the Aquatorium, which was public and private funding, all levels of government, service club funding, private donation. It is a municipal owned property, but it was a community growth event. My not knowing what their budget is, but my expectation would be that it's still supported by taxpayers' dollar. It's not self-sufficient, but all of the activities that happen in that building are a pay-for-use activity. I can see a similar type of model if it ends up being a municipal-owned building, that there's a lot of different things happening in the building, pay-per-use model, and with a municipal budget that's supporting it over the long haul.
That's a great contribution to a model, very well framed as an example.
Yeah. Susan, you are we're finishing so strong. The any other thoughts or comments? I don't want to cut anyone off, but or Susan, defer to you as well.
Well, I do have one final thought that actually I have Stephen to thank for his insights. As we promote ourselves as a municipality, the one thing that we promote is our natural assets. And in promoting those assets, we have a responsibility to protect those assets and our natural assets. And as we work through making this cultural center a reality, I'd like to suggest that we look at ways that we can make it an environmentally with a small environmental footprint, and even look at a partnership with Sir Sanford Fleming here in Lindsay, an environmentally based college, and the ways that as we look at a location and we look at things like Stephen had pointed out for us, that we look at a partnership there as to how we might be innovative and best models that make us good stewards of our assets, our natural assets. And that, Julie, thank you for asking. That is my final thought.
That's great. That's another phenomenal spot to kind of land, and I think can be part of some of our, if not assessment criteria, certainly part of the dynamic that we think about of site selection or follow up. So as I mentioned, I'll just run through now. Stephanie did take a minute to walk through these steps of phase 3. So I don't know if we need to go through them again, but the space needs analysis, the location analysis from our side, sort of on the operations side, JIMO again, looking at various standards and the design guidelines. So we really are pulling this. Oh, sorry, Stephanie, go for it.
I was just going to add, I did mention the space needs analysis. That's the sort of looking at the Moscow and then trying to figure out the square footage, and then also taking that and going back to the location analysis to further refine that. But just to help sort of better define or explain what the standards and design guidelines section of the report is, that's really a section that is a bit more specific to what those standards for facility for the building would need to be. So that'll include things like, if you are an exhibit, a gallery, an archive, those technical needs from lighting and ventilation and all of those things, and access as well. but also then the design guidelines are a bit more broad and high level and aspirational. And those are things where I think, Susan, your comment just now on environmentally sustainable, that can play into a lot of different ways, but certainly a building is has a huge environmental impact. And so that's something that will go into the, could go into the design guidelines as, you know, an example of this facility should be environmentally sustainable. And then it would define, you know, what does that mean? Does that mean reusing an existing building because sort of recycling infrastructure? Or if it is a new construction, what are the green standards that it needs to abide by? Design guidelines might also mention things like the ways for the space to be inclusive and accessible to various communities, like Indigenous communities. And so that's what that section will be, and it'll build a bit more on precedents as well. So just wanted to let people know what that work will look like in phase 3.
Thank you, Stephanie. Much better than I could have summarized there. And then when we look, so phase 3 really is, we're pulling it together in April. We've, you know, in a way we started last week, and even in some ways planted the seeds over the past few weeks. But with today, we're kind of officially towards phase 3. That being said, I think, you know, if you have reflections or after this meeting, obviously maybe we can accept them through Donna, but I would encourage you to send them as soon as you can, and not wait too long before providing any feedback specific to kind of today's discussion. You'll of course have another window to review the draft at the end of the month. And we have a pretty ambitious timeline for turnaround in terms of various presentations at the end of May and in June and so on. But yeah, again, just not to repeat myself, but confident with this, with today's session, we're in a much better position to get there. So you know, we're a little ahead of time and can stay around for a bit, but if there's any questions, but thank you so much for your time on this intense session, but very fruitful for us. And we may have spot follow-ups around some of those specifications to kind of narrow some of our ranges. We may work through Donna for those to keep it efficient and just for kind of transparency, but hopefully won't be too burdensome. That goes to the TAC as well. That's not just the taskers, but also the TAC, but we'll try to keep those pretty contained. But thank you. So that's yeah. Thank you so much. And thanks to Donna and Susan for chairing. Patrick?
Well, thank you, Julie.
Yeah, I have one more question that has to do with sites. I know that the city of Kawartha Lakes has another area that they're soliciting public interest at the moment, the Old Mill Heritage area, I think they're calling it. Has the old mill site been considered in the investigation of properties?
I think that was not on the original list that we received. Okay. Donna shaking your head, right?
It wasn't. It's a relic. It's a artifact unto itself. It's also part of a municipal park. And so it's open green space. It sort of sits behind the downtown main street of Lindsay, like it's down the, toward, of course, on the water where the mill was originally built. So no, it's not an active, it's not zoned, like it wouldn't have been a part of that original properties list, because it's not technically seen as an actual property anymore.
In 2015, the city solicited expressions of interest with the concept of renting the building on a 99-year lease to somebody who wanted to build and operate a brew pub off of the location.
Yeah, that is true.
The feasibility of building on the existing structure is still viable, and it should maybe be revisited. I'm not suggesting it's an ideal site, but it is a site. I know when Peterborough was looking at their possible site for the canoe museum, locating on the waterway was giving them some additional means of financing through the Trent Severn waterways and some other avenues. And in my mind, the more different collaborators you can have in contribution, the better. So that's all. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks,
certainly.
Pat.
Certainly, Susan, it can be put on as a review for sure.
Okay, thanks, Donna. Well, this has been a really great session. Thank you to everybody. Really, a lot of great feedback. So if there's no further comments or any further questions, I think we'd be moving on to the next item, which is looking at our next meeting date. Donna, any input?
Well, I wouldn't be able to like target an actual date, but it is kind of between the phase 3, phase 4. So from Julie's slide just previous to this discussion here, it'd be somewhere in there. So I think we're looking at end of April, beginning of May.
Okay, so we'll just look to hear from you. Okay, that's good. So Athol, how would you like to make a motion for adjournment?
I would love to.
Thank you, sir. So there we go, folks. Once again, many thanks. And we'll look forward to seeing you the end of April or early May, if not before.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.